Imagine a moment in late autumn. The leaves, once bright with the fire of summer's end, now drift softly to the ground. No resistance, no regret. The trees do not grasp at what is falling. They simply let go. And in their bare branches, a strange kind of beauty emerges, quiet, patient, full of space. Aging is like this. Not a decline, but a season, not an end, but a slow and sacred return. In the Western world, aging is often spoken of in hushed tones or avoided altogether, something to resist, something to hide. But in Buddhist philosophy, the passing of time is not feared, it is honored. It is the very teacher that leads us toward wisdom. In the stillness of your heart, have you noticed how much you carry that is no longer yours to hold? Old stories, long ago wounds, expectations that hardened into regrets. As the years pass, it's not just our bodies that grow tired, it's our souls too, burdened by the weight of what we've not yet released. There's a story told in Zen practice, one of two monks traveling together. As they walked through the countryside, they came upon a riverbank where a young woman stood, unable to cross. One monk, without hesitation, lifted her onto his back and carried her through the water. On the other side, he set her down, and they continued on their way. Hours passed in silence. Finally, the second monk turned to the first and said, "You should not have carried her. It's against our vows." The first monk replied, "I set her down at the river's edge. Why are you still carrying her?" This is the quiet burden many people unknowingly bear as they age. Not the years themselves, but the moments they couldn't release. A word left unspoken, a friendship that faded, a child who no longer calls. The body may ache from time to time, but what truly weighs us down is the mind's habit of holding on. You may find yourself, now in your 60s or 70s, waking with the ache of questions you didn't ask, of roads not taken. But what if this stage of life isn't about doing more or fixing what's past? What if it's about unburdening, unraveling, and being? In Buddhism, there is a concept called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as a deep unease, the friction of wanting life to be other than it is. Much of that suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from how tightly we cling to the illusion that things should be permanent. Youth, health, loved ones, control, but nothing is fixed. Not the spring bloom, not the body, not even the self we think we are. So ask yourself gently, what are you still carrying across the river of time? In the modern world, we are taught to build, accumulate, achieve, but there comes a point in every life when the wiser path is to let go. Not because what you've held was unworthy, but because your hands must be empty to receive what comes next. An older woman once shared a story during a meditation retreat. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, and though time had softened the sharpness of her grief, something still lingered: guilt. "I was angry with him the week he died," she confessed. "I never said goodbye properly." She carried that moment like a stone in her pocket, touching it daily. But through quiet mindfulness, she began to sit with the feeling, not to fight it, but to hold it with compassion. And slowly, that stone turned into something else. Not guilt, but love, in a different shape. This is the gift of awareness, to sit with what is true, even if it is painful, and soften the edges of our resistance. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means meeting what was with such tenderness that it no longer controls what is. And so, the path of mindful aging is not about losing who you were. It's about becoming who you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the striving, beneath the sorrow. Have you ever stood at the edge of a memory, unsure whether to turn back or move forward. Aging often brings you to these thresholds, not just in body but in mind. The places where the past tugs at you like an old song, familiar and bittersweet, while the future remains an open sky, quiet and uncertain. The Buddhists call this space ma, a Japanese term borrowed into Zen that means the pause, the in-between, or even the silence between two notes. It is in this sacred stillness that much of late life unfolds, not in the doing, but in the being, not in the answers, but in learning to sit comfortably with the questions. For many, retirement or an empty home can feel like a kind of death, not of life itself, but of identity. Who are you when no one needs you at 6 a.m.? Who are you when the children no longer ask for your advice? When your name is no longer listed on the company board? When no one remembers how fast you once ran or how much you once achieved? In Buddhist teaching, this moment is not a loss, it is liberation. Because now, finally, you are free from the roles that once defined you, free from the story you've had to uphold. What remains is not emptiness, but spaciousness. And within that spaciousness is the invitation to discover what lies beneath the masks we've worn. There is a story told of a teacher who carried a cracked bowl. Every day, she would use it during the meal offering, and every day, a few drops of water would escape through the crack. One student asked why she didn't replace it. She smiled and said, "Because each day, those drops nourish a flower by the path. If the bowl were whole, the flower would go thirsty. We are not whole in the way we used to be. The body has its aches, the face has its lines, memory sometimes flickers, but the cracks in our lives are not flaws. They are openings. Through them, compassion can flow. Through them, we water flowers we may never see bloom." So, you may ask yourself now, what flowers am I still nourishing, even if I no longer see their petals? Psychologically, the later stages of life are deeply reflective. Erik Erikson, the great developmental psychologist, described this phase as a tension between ego integrity and despair. Integrity comes when we look back on life with a sense of meaning, seeing not perfection, but wholeness. Despair arises when we see only missed chances and irreparable mistakes. But what if those feelings don't have to be at war with each other? What if despair is simply the voice asking to be listened to be softened by understanding? Buddhist compassion begins exactly there, not with fixing, but with witnessing. Just as a good friend does not rush to solve your pain, but simply sits beside it, so too does mindfulness sit with your sorrow, without judgment. One man, in his early 70s, shared a quiet moment during a grief circle. His wife had passed 2 years earlier, and he was left with a house full of silence. "I talk to her still," he said, "and sometimes I forget she's gone." I set out 2 cups of tea. He looked down and chuckled, then added softly, "It hurts, but in a beautiful way." What he described was not denial, it was devotion transformed. Not grasping at the past, but letting love take a new shape. Aging in this way is a gentle reshaping of love. What once held form in a hug or a daily routine now lingers in breath, in memory, in the still rituals of everyday life. There is a kind of mindfulness that matures only with time, the awareness not of what's missing, but of what remains. Letting go, then, is not about abandoning what was dear. It is about no longer needing it to be what it once was. The hands may release, but the heart remembers differently now, not with clinging, but with peace. And maybe that is what this stage of life truly offers, the chance to rewrite our relationship with time, not as something chasing us, but something walking with us, step by step, breath by breath. In the quiet of an early morning, when the world hasn't fully awakened, There's a gentle hush that seems to say, you don't need to rush. For many older adults, this slowing down can feel unfamiliar, almost unsettling. After decades of productivity, caretaking, decision-making, and responsibility, what happens when life no longer demands your speed, but asks instead for your presence? The modern world is addicted to movement. To be busy is to be important. To be still is to be overlooked. But Buddhist teachings offer a different truth. True insight arises in stillness. The most profound changes in a person's heart often happen not in times of action, but in quiet watching, in noticing a pattern of thought, a flicker of regret, the way the light falls across a photograph on the table. Take, for example, the story of the monk who asked his master, "What must I do to attain enlightenment?" The master replied, "Have you finished eating your rice?" The monk nodded. "Then wash your bowl." That was the lesson. In this story there is no secret mantra or mountain to climb. The path to awakening is found in the simplest act, done with full awareness, done with care. In aging too, there is wisdom in the ordinary. The slowness of the body is not a hindrance, but an invitation. Every gesture, reaching for a cup, folding laundry, watering the plants, becomes a chance to return to the moment, to live with reverence. This too is mindfulness, not just a meditation practice, but a way of relating to each part of your life as though it matters deeply, because it does. A woman in her late 60s once shared that she used to hate the sound of the ticking clock in her living room. "It reminded me of time passing, of how little I had left," she said. "But after practicing mindful breathing, I began to hear it differently. Now each tick sounds like a heartbeat. It reminds me I'm still here." Aging teaches us this. Presence is not measured in how much we accomplish, but in how deeply we notice, how fully we feel, how gently we move through our days. You may have noticed how conversations slow down, how your body invites you to pause more often. At first, these changes might seem like losses, but beneath them lies a gift: space. Space to remember, space to forgive, space to feel life again, not just rush through it. In Buddhism, the concept of non-attachment does not mean indifference. It does not mean you no longer care. It means you learn to hold everything, including your thoughts, your body, your very identity, more lightly, like a bird resting in your palm, open-handed. If it flies away, it was never yours to keep. If it stays, it does so freely. So ask yourself gently, what are you gripping that longs to be held more lightly? This might be a long-held belief about yourself, that you must always be strong, never ask for help. Or perhaps it's a picture of how life was supposed to turn out, a story you've carried about who you should have been. But now, in the quiet space of these later years, there is time to loosen your grip, to let yourself simply be unpolished, imperfect, enough. There is a soft power in aging, often overlooked, a kind of authority that does not need to prove or perform. It speaks not with certainty, but with presence. It does not demand attention. It gives it to others, to life, to the breath coming in and going out. And when you begin to live like this, not hurried, not reaching, you find something surprising, a sweetness you may have missed in earlier years. The way sunlight rests on your hands, the way your tea tastes when you actually taste it, the way your breath carries you through even the hardest days, quietly, faithfully. This is the gentle art of aging, to walk slower, but see deeper, to speak less, but mean more, to carry less, but feel fuller. In Buddhist teachings, there is a quiet truth repeated like a soft bell: everything that arises will pass away. This is the law of impermanence, anicca, and it touches every part of life. The joys, the sorrows, the relationships, the roles, the very breath we take. All things come, stay a while, and then dissolve back into the silence from which they came. To a younger heart, impermanence can feel like a threat, something to be feared or fought. But in the later years of life, when so much has already been lost, or let go, or transformed, impermanence becomes less of a concept and more of a companion. Not cruel, but constant. Not punishing, but honest. There was once a king who asked the Buddha for a teaching that would be true in all situations, whether in joy or despair. The Buddha replied with just 5 words. "This too shall pass away." These words are not meant to distance us from life, but to help us embrace it more fully, precisely because it is fleeting. When you know that every moment is temporary, you begin to see it differently. You don't rush past it. You don't hold it too tightly either. You allow it to touch you and then leave, like a breeze moving through an open window. One man in his early 80s, widowed and living alone, said that the hardest part of his day was dusk. "It's the time we used to cook dinner together," he explained. "Now I just sit and watch the light fade." But he began lighting a small candle during that hour, not to replace the absence, but to honor it. "It reminds me," he said, "that endings can be gentle too. You may have your own dusk hour, the time of day or year or memory that stirs a hollow feeling inside. But what if, instead of turning away from that space, you turned toward it with mindfulness? What if you brought a candle to it, not to erase the darkness, but to sit with it softly, tenderly? In the West, we're taught to conquer grief, to fix it, to overcome it, to move on. But Buddhism teaches us to bow to grief, to let it speak, to let it wash over us like rain, because even grief, held mindfully, begins to soften. There is a Zen saying, "Let your tears water the seeds of your future." This is not just poetic comfort, it's psychological truth. Research shows that those who allow themselves to grieve fully, without shame or suppression, often emerge with greater wisdom, deeper empathy, and renewed clarity about what truly matters. Letting go, then, does not mean forgetting what you've lost. It means remembering differently, not with a desperate grip, but with a quiet reverence. You might be surprised how many emotions you've stored away, like boxes in an attic. Grief you didn't have time to feel, anger you were taught to swallow, even joy you thought you didn't deserve. As you age, those boxes start to stir, not to punish you, but to offer you one last chance to open them, to see what's inside, to thank them, and to finally let them go. Imagine yourself walking through your own attic now. Which box would you open first? What would it say to you? This kind of reflection is not easy. It requires courage, the soft kind, not the loud kind. The courage to sit still and listen, to feel without needing to fix, and to trust that your heart knows how to heal, if only you stop rushing it. In Buddhist thought, karma is not about punishment or reward. It is about cause and effect. The seeds we plant in our thoughts and actions will bear fruit, sometimes in ways we do not expect. But this also means something beautiful. It's never too late to plant a new seed, a seed of compassion, of forgiveness, of peace. Even now, even here, even with whatever pain or limitations you carry, you can begin again with a single breath, a single step, a single whispered prayer of release. Because aging isn't just about what ends, it's also about what begins again, gently, quietly, in the space that letting go creates. In the sacred texts of Buddhist tradition, there is often mention of the middle way, a path not of indulgence nor of denial, but of balance. It is the path of gentleness, of wisdom, that comes not from extremes but from a deep and steady presence. As one ages, this middle way becomes more than a teaching. It becomes a lived reality. The body no longer rushes, the mind seeks less noise. The heart, if you listen closely, begins to long for stillness more than excitement. This shift can feel strange at first. You might find yourself withdrawing from conversations that once seemed important, or feeling peace in moments of solitude that once felt lonely. The world still spins around you, faster than ever, but something within begins to slow, not out of weakness, but out of knowing. You no longer need to prove yourself or chase every opportunity. What matters now is not more, but deeper. There's a story from a Zen monastery where an old monk would sit by the same tree every morning, saying nothing, just watching the light move across the ground. A young novice once asked, "What do you do when you sit so still?" The elder smiled and said, "I listen for what doesn't speak. There is a kind of wisdom that only silence reveals. In the stillness of aging, you begin to hear what youth was too loud to notice. The rustle of breath, the tenderness in goodbye, the faint but faithful rhythm of your own being. Many older adults carry an unspoken burden, the sense that their best contributions are behind them, but Buddhism teaches that our greatest gift may come in the form of our being, not our doing. To sit quietly with someone who is grieving, to listen without needing to fix, to offer a smile, a word, a presence that says, 'You are not alone.' These are the acts of true compassion. They require no strength of body, only strength of heart. Have you noticed how in this stage of life your sensitivity has grown, not just to pain but to beauty? How a bird on the windowsill can stir your heart. How a grandchild's laughter feels like sunlight breaking through. This heightened perception is not accidental. It is the fruit of presence. When we no longer rush past life, we begin to taste it bite by bite, breath by breath. In Buddhist psychology, this is called sati, mindfulness rooted in memory. Not just remembering the past, but remembering to be present now. One woman in her 70s described how she began a practice of gratitude every evening before sleep. Not dramatic declarations, just simple noticing, the way her hands still worked when folding the sheets, the way the garden smelled after rain, the warmth of her favorite blanket. "It saved me," she said. "I was drowning in what I'd lost. But when I turned toward what remained, I found my life again." This is not denial. It is not spiritual optimism that ignores pain. It is the deep and grounded wisdom that sees both joy and sorrow as guests passing through the same house. You do not cling to either. You simply open the door. Ask yourself gently, what have I overlooked today that was quietly beautiful? This kind of gentle seeing is itself a form of letting go of distraction, of numbness, of the habit of missing our lives while living them. And slowly something begins to change. You begin to find meaning, not in grand revelations, but in ordinary moments. A quiet afternoon, a warm mug in your hands, a memory that no longer hurts but hums softly in your chest. In this way, aging becomes not an unraveling, but a deepening. Not a fading away, but a turning inward, toward the core of who you are beneath all the roles you've played. The middle way teaches us that peace does not come from having everything just right. It comes from living in alignment with what is true. And what is true is this: you are still here, still breathing, still becoming. There is an image in Buddhist meditation often shared with those nearing the end of a retreat. The lotus rising from the mud. It does not resist the darkness from which it grows. In fact, it depends on it. Without the murky water, there would be no stem, no bloom, no radiance. So it is with life. The pain, the loss, the confusion, they are not proof that something went wrong. They are the very soil from which wisdom and compassion arise. And as the years pass, your roots stretch deep into that mud. You have weathered storms. You have survived seasons. And now you rise not quickly, not loudly, but fully, with grace. This stage of life, often feared or ignored in youth, becomes a doorway not just to aging, but to awakening. The outer world may begin to fade, the job titles, the recognition, the pace of activity, but the inner world becomes luminous. Silence turns golden, emptiness becomes full, and you begin to notice a deeper rhythm pulsing through each moment, like the ocean beneath the waves. One man in his late 70s described a transformation after a fall left him unable to walk for several months. "I used to hike every weekend," he said. "The loss felt unbearable at first. But as I sat on my porch, unable to go anywhere, I started to see the birds, the clouds, the way the shadows changed by the hour. I thought I had lost freedom, but I had only lost speed. What I gained was stillness. Stillness, when accepted, becomes a gift. But when resisted, it feels like a prison." That is the difference mindfulness makes. It does not change what is happening, but it changes how you relate to what is happening. You stop fighting life and begin walking with it, hand in hand. In Buddhist terms, this is the cultivation of equanimity, a calm inner balance that holds joy and sorrow in equal space. Not numbness, but openness. Not passivity, but presence. You may still grieve, you may still feel regret. But with equanimity, those emotions flow like water instead of hardening into stones. You feel them, and then you let them go. There's a beautiful tale about a Buddhist nun named Mahapajapati, the Buddha's aunt and foster mother. In her later years, after a lifetime of service and devotion, she sought to join the monastic order. At first, she was denied. She walked barefoot, in silence, with hundreds of other women, through dust and doubt. But her perseverance, gentle yet unwavering, changed the course of Buddhist history. She became the first ordained nun, not by demanding, not by anger, but by steady, quiet strength. That strength lives in you too, the kind that doesn't shout, but endures, the kind that knows how to begin again, even after loss, even after everything. So now in this part of your life you may ask, what is it time to honor? Not just to release, but to bless. Perhaps it's your own resilience, the kindnesses you gave without recognition, the way you kept going, even when no one saw. These things matter. They live on in others, even when you forget. This too is karma, not fate, but the ripple of every thought, word, and action. You've been planting seeds your whole life. Some have already bloomed. Others will bloom long after you're gone. Let that truth be a comfort. You are not disappearing. You are becoming part of the great unfolding, like leaves returning to soil, like stars returning to sky. The quieter your life becomes, the more you begin to hear what's always been speaking. The sound of your own soul, not the version that was chasing dreams, but the one that watches the moon rise without needing anything more. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where you need to be, returning, softening, awakening. In the dimming light of life's afternoon, many begin to reflect not only on what they have done, but what they have not. The words left unspoken, the doors never opened, the love never expressed. These quiet ghosts of the past do not shout, but they linger, and if left unacknowledged, they grow heavy with time. But Buddhism does not view regret as something to fear. It sees it as a teacher, one that arrives late, but often with the most important lessons. Regret is not a punishment. It is a call to pay attention, to turn the heart toward what still can be healed, not by erasing the past, but by meeting it with compassion. There is a story of a woman who spent her life estranged from her sister. Decades passed. Illness arrived. Regret filled her like a tide she could no longer ignore. "We wasted so much time," she whispered during a meditation retreat. But the teacher didn't urge her to fix it immediately. Instead, they practiced metta, loving-kindness meditation. Day by day, she sent silent blessings to her sister. "May you be well. May you be free." She never spoke those words aloud, but something in her shifted. The sharp edge of regret softened into grace. This is the power of intention. In Buddhist thought, it is not only action that carries weight, but the heart behind the action. Even if the body cannot travel, even if the phone call never happens, the direction of your mind matters. A thought of kindness, a prayer of release, can untie knots that years of silence could not. So ask yourself now, not with judgment, but with honesty, what have I been holding that is asking to be forgiven? And not just toward others, but toward yourself. Many carry an invisible burden of self-blame into old age. The feeling that you should have done more, or done less, that you failed someone, that you wasted time, that you weren't enough. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to the idea of a fixed self is itself a source of suffering. The you of the past no longer exists, not as you remember, not as others do. What remains is only this moment, this breath, this chance. In one Zen story, a student says to his master, "I feel weighed down by my past mistakes." The master pours tea until it overflows the cup. "You are full of yesterday," he says. "Make space for today." Making space doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing not to be defined by it. It means offering yourself the same compassion you would offer a dear friend. Would you tell them they are unforgivable? Would you insist they be perfect before they can rest? No. You would hold their hand, look into their eyes and say, "You are human. You are still loved." Can you say that to yourself now? Forgiveness is not a dramatic act. Often it is a slow unfolding, a breath where once there was tension, a moment where once there was blame, a pause before the old story repeats, and a choice not to go there. And from that pause, something new can grow, a gentler way of speaking to yourself, a willingness to smile without reason, a quiet thank you to a morning that doesn't hurt as much as it used to. This is the sacred medicine of aging, the chance to love what you once rejected, to find beauty in the cracks, to rest in the truth that you do not have to be who you once were. You can be softer now, wiser, more open. You have earned that right, not through perfection, but through presence, through staying, even when it was hard. You are not the story of your regrets. You are the one who is listening to that story now, with patience, with kindness, with room to let it go. In the silence that comes with age, something begins to shift, not only in the body, but in the soul's orientation to time. The future no longer stretches out infinitely ahead. The past no longer demands to be relived. What remains is now clear, precious, fragile, and in this now, a quiet realization begins to emerge. There is nothing more to become, nothing more to chase, nothing more to fix. You have lived, you have loved, you have lost, and you are still here. Breathing, witnessing, being. This is not resignation. This is freedom. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not something we achieve in some distant paradise. It is here, in the ordinary moment, when the mind no longer clings and the heart no longer resists. When you can say yes to life, exactly as it is. There is a story of an old Zen master who, when asked what he had learned from a lifetime of practice, said only this: "Everything is just as it is. No embellishment, no rejection, no grasping. Just a profound acceptance that carries with it immense peace. Imagine now the rhythm of your breath, rising and falling like waves meeting the shore. Each inhale a reminder that life is still flowing through you. Each exhale a release, a letting go of what is no longer needed. You don't have to hold on anymore, not to the roles you've played, or the expectations others placed on you, or even the version of yourself you thought you had to be. You can let the past rest in the past. You can forgive the unlived dreams. You can soften around the regrets. You can bless every scar, not because they didn't hurt, but because they shaped the depth of your compassion. Even now, as the world grows quieter, your spirit expands. In Buddhist terms, this is nirvana, not an escape, but a deep extinguishing of the fire of craving, a cool, spacious ease, a homecoming. One woman in her 80s, speaking during a closing circle at a meditation retreat, held her weathered hands in front of her. "I used to look at these and mourn how much they've aged," she said. "But now I look at them and see all the hands they've held, all the meals they've cooked, all the comfort they've given. These hands have loved so well." This is the transformation that comes not from time, but from awareness. A shift from lamenting what has passed to honoring what has been and what's still. So now, as you sit in this moment, ask yourself with gentleness, what part of me have I not yet thanked? What part of me still waits to be embraced? There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to perform. There is only this chance to live the rest of your life with softness, with presence, with reverence for all that you are and all that you've been. The person who has learned to love themselves no longer fears losing anything.